When civilizations collapse, we often imagine weakness, empty treasuries, defeated armies, decaying cities, a slow fade into irrelevance. But history tells a far more unsettling story. Most civilizations do not collapse when they are poor, fragile, or failing. They collapse at their peak, at the height of their power, at the moment of greatest influence. When their cities are largest, their systems most complex, and their authority seemingly unquestionable. This is the paradox that haunts human history. The Akkadian Empire collapsed after uniting Mesopotamia. The Maya declined after centuries of architectural and intellectual achievement. Rome fractured while still commanding vast resources and unmatched infrastructure. The Khmer Empire fell after building one of the largest urban systems the world had ever seen. These were not dying societies grasping for survival. They were dominant systems that appeared stable, even inevitable. So why did they fall? The answer is uncomfortable. Civilizations rarely collapse because of a single disaster. Not one invasion, not one famine, not one bad ruler. Collapse is almost always systemic. It begins long before the final crisis, hidden beneath success. At their peak, civilizations are most confident in their systems. Their institutions feel permanent. Their structures feel proven. Their rules feel necessary. This confidence is dangerous, because the very systems that create expansion also generate fragility. Complex bureaucracies require constant resources. Large populations demand precise coordination. Infrastructure must be maintained without interruption. Belief systems must remain convincing. Elites must justify inequality. Growth must continue, or the system strains. As civilizations expand, they become efficient but rigid. Power becomes centralized but brittle. Success narrows imagination. Adaptation slows. And when stress appears, climate shifts, resource depletion, internal conflict, external pressure, the system struggles not because it is weak, but because it is too optimized for a world that no longer exists. At the peak, civilizations are least prepared for change. They have invested everything in making the present permanent. This is why collapse often feels sudden, but it is not sudden at all. It is the final, visible stage of pressures that accumulated quietly for generations. History does not warn civilizations when they reach the edge. There are no alarms, no clear thresholds, only subtle signs. Increasing complexity, growing inequality, rising maintenance costs, diminishing returns, rigid institutions, belief systems stretched thin. To the people living inside these societies, collapse does not look like decline. It looks like normal life until it doesn't. This documentary is not about catastrophe. It is about patterns, about why success plants the seeds of failure, why complexity creates vulnerability, why power resists adaptation, and why civilizations often fall not when they are weakest, but when they believe they are strongest. To understand collapse, we must stop looking at the moment everything breaks, and start looking at the moment everything seems to work. At the height of a civilization's power, stability feels natural. Institutions function smoothly, food reaches markets, laws are enforced, trade flows across vast distances, cities expand, monuments rise. To those living within the system, this stability feels earned, the result of superior organization, culture, or leadership. But stability is often an illusion. What appears stable is usually balanced on constant motion. Ancient civilizations depended on continuous inputs, grain shipments, labor drafts, tax collection, tribute, religious compliance, administrative coordination. When these flows moved without interruption, society felt secure. When they slowed, the system strained. At its peak, a civilization is not resting. It is running at maximum capacity. This is where fragility hides. The more complex a system becomes, the more precisely it must be maintained. Minor disruptions, a failed harvest, a delayed tax shipment, a weakened frontier, ripple outward. The margin for error shrinks. The Roman Empire offers a clear example. At its height, Rome maintained roads stretching thousands of kilometers, standing armies on multiple frontiers, grain imports from North Africa, and a massive bureaucracy to manage it all. This system worked, but only as long as every component functioned. When pressures mounted, climate shifts, inflation, political instability, the system didn't adapt easily. It doubled down, taxes increased, bureaucracy expanded, control tightened, short-term stability was preserved, long-term resilience was sacrificed. The illusion of stability also distorts decision-making. Leaders at the peak interpret problems as temporary. Dissent is dismissed. Warnings are ignored. Institutions become defensive rather than adaptive, because acknowledging structural weakness threatens legitimacy. For ancient rulers, legitimacy was everything. Kings ruled by divine favor, emperors ruled by tradition, elites ruled by inheritance. Admitting that the system itself was flawed meant undermining the foundation of authority. So problems were managed, not solved. Complexity increased, regulation multiplied, administrative layers thickened. The system became more impressive and more fragile. This pattern appears across civilizations. The Maya built increasingly elaborate cities even as environmental pressures mounted. The Akkadian Empire expanded its administration while drought weakened agricultural foundations. The Khmer engineered vast water systems that eventually became too complex to maintain. In each case, Peak stability masked declining adaptability. What looks like strength is often rigidity. What looks like order is often dependence. What looks like permanence is often momentum. Civilizations collapse not when chaos overwhelms order, but when order becomes incapable of responding to chaos. At the peak, systems are optimized for efficiency, not flexibility. They are designed to preserve the present, not accommodate the future. This is why collapse feels sudden. The illusion of stability holds until it doesn't. And when it breaks everywhere at once. As civilizations grow, they solve problems by adding layers. More officials to manage territory, more laws to regulate behavior, more infrastructure to support expansion, more systems to control resources, labor, and belief. At first, this works. Complexity brings efficiency. Specialization increases productivity. Centralized authority reduces chaos. But complexity comes at a cost. Every new layer requires maintenance, every solution generates new dependencies, every institution consumes resources. Over time, civilizations enter a dangerous phase, diminishing returns. The benefits of added complexity shrink, while the costs continue to rise. Anthropologist Joseph Tainter described this pattern clearly. Early investments in complexity, such as irrigation, administration, or military organization, yield large returns. Later investments produce smaller gains, while demanding greater energy, labor, and coordination. Eventually, the system begins to solve problems by creating more problems. A tax shortfall leads to higher taxes. Higher taxes require more administrators. More administrators require more funding. More funding increases pressure on the population. The solution deepens the strain. Ancient Rome illustrates this dynamic with painful clarity. As external threats increased and internal stability weakened, Rome expanded its bureaucracy, military spending, and legal complexity. These measures preserved order in the short term, but they drained resources from productive sectors of society. Farmers abandoned land, trade slowed. Currency was debased to meet expenses. Public trust eroded. The system didn't collapse because it lacked solutions. It collapsed because solutions became too expensive to sustain. The same pattern appears elsewhere. The Maya intensified agriculture through terracing and water management to support growing populations. Over time, soil depletion and environmental stress reduced yields. Maintaining complexity required ever greater effort for diminishing results. The Khmer Empire engineered one of the most advanced hydraulic systems in the ancient world. But as the system expanded, it became increasingly vulnerable to drought, flooding, and maintenance failures. When pressure increased, the system could not scale further. At this stage, civilizations face a fatal dilemma. Reducing complexity threatens order. Increasing complexity accelerates collapse. There is no painless option. Most choose to preserve complexity because it sustains power, hierarchy, and legitimacy. But complexity is not neutral. It concentrates resources upward. It increases inequality. It distances elites from the lived realities of the population. As returns diminish, resentment grows. The system becomes heavy, slow, and brittle. Collapse does not arrive as an external shock. It emerges internally, as the cost of maintaining civilization exceeds the benefits it provides to most people. At that point, participation declines. Compliance weakens. Trust evaporates. The system still exists, but fewer people believe in it. And once belief collapses, complexity becomes a burden rather than a solution. This is how civilizations begin to unravel. Not from ignorance or chaos, but from the unsustainable weight of their own success. As civilizations grow more complex, power concentrates. Resources flow upward. Land accumulates in fewer hands. Political authority narrows. Decision-making distances itself from everyday life. At first, this concentration appears functional. Elites manage complexity. Administrators coordinate systems. Rulers embody order. But over time, a dangerous gap opens. Not just between rich and poor, but between power and legitimacy. In ancient societies, legitimacy was not optional. It was the glue that held systems together. Kings ruled by divine favor. Empires justified authority through tradition, ritual, and law. Elites claimed their position as necessary for stability. As long as people believed these claims, inequality could be tolerated. But belief is fragile. When systems demand more while delivering less, legitimacy erodes. Taxes rise while infrastructure decays. Labor increases while security weakens. Elites grow insulated while common people bear the costs. At the peak of civilizations, this imbalance often becomes extreme. Rome's late empire saw massive wealth concentration among land-owning elites, while small farmers were crushed by taxes and debt. Many abandoned their land, seeking protection under powerful patrons, trading freedom for survival. The Maya elite continued constructing monumental architecture, even as food shortages intensified. These displays of power, once symbols of divine order, became reminders of disconnect. In Mesopotamia, rulers increasingly relied on coercion as belief systems weakened. Law codes grew harsher, punishments more severe. Control replaced consent. This shift marks a critical moment. When legitimacy fades, power must compensate. More force, more surveillance. more regulation. But coercion is expensive. It requires resources, loyalty, and constant enforcement. And it further alienates the population, accelerating the cycle. Elites often misread this stage. From the top, the system still functions. Palaces are maintained, ceremonies continue, titles remain impressive. From below, the system feels extractive. People no longer see the state as a shared project, but as an external burden. Participation declines. Compliance becomes minimal. Local identities strengthen as central authority weakens. Collapse does not begin with rebellion. It begins with disengagement. People stop investing emotionally, economically, and socially in the system. They withdraw effort. They avoid taxes. They question laws. They lose faith. Once legitimacy is gone, even strong institutions struggle to survive, because systems do not run on force alone. They run on belief. At the peak of civilization, inequality often reaches a level where belief can no longer compensate for burden. The system still appears powerful, but it is hollowing out from within. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one, and it is one of the most consistent warning signs across history. Every civilization is built on a foundation. It does not control land, water, climate, soil, forests, animals. At their peak, civilizations often behave as if these foundations are infinite. They expand agriculture. They cut forests. They divert rivers. They extract resources at unprecedented scale. For a time, the results are extraordinary. Food surpluses grow, populations increase, cities expand, trade networks stretch farther than ever before. But the natural world does not respond to ambition. It responds to limits. Environmental stress rarely announces itself dramatically. It accumulates slowly, quietly, and unevenly, often hidden beneath short-term success. The Akkadian Empire expanded rapidly across Mesopotamia, relying on intensive agriculture in a fragile climate zone. Geological evidence now suggests that prolonged drought reduced crop yields and disrupted food distribution. The empire did not collapse overnight. It weakened as its environmental base eroded. The Maya lowlands tell a similar story. Population growth pushed agriculture into marginal lands. Forests were cleared to support construction and farming. Over time, soil fertility declined, water systems strained, and droughts became more devastating. At their height, these societies were more vulnerable to environmental change than at any other time. Why? Because complexity amplifies dependence. Large populations require stable harvests. Complex systems demand predictable inputs. Urban centers cannot easily adapt to shortages. When environmental stress increases, civilizations face difficult choices. They intensify extraction, they expand irrigation, they push labor harder, they build larger systems to compensate. These responses preserve output in the short term, but accelerate long-term degradation. The Khmer Empire's vast water management system is a striking example. Designed to control floods and droughts, it allowed the empire to thrive. But as climate variability increased, the system became harder to maintain. Repairs lagged, channels clogged, infrastructure failed. What once ensured resilience became a source of fragility. Environmental stress does not collapse civilizations directly. It exposes weaknesses. It turns small disruptions into cascading failures. It magnifies inequality. It strains legitimacy. It overwhelms maintenance capacity. Importantly, elites often experience environmental stress last. Food shortages hit rural populations first. Urban centers are prioritized. Resources are diverted upward. This delay creates false confidence. From the center, the system still functions. From the margins, it is already breaking. By the time environmental stress reaches the core, institutional response is slow and constrained. Adaptation requires reducing complexity, redistributing resources, or abandoning established practices, all politically dangerous moves. So civilizations often persist in strategies that no longer work, not because leaders are ignorant, but because the system is locked into its own momentum. Collapse, in these cases, is not punishment by nature. It is a mismatch between growth and limit. A civilization at its peak has the most to lose and the least flexibility. And when the physical world pushes back, systems optimized for expansion struggle to adapt. When civilizations collapse, it is often tempting to blame the outside world. Invasions, barbarians at the gates, foreign armies, hostile neighbors. These forces are visible. They leave ruins and battlefields. They feel like clear causes, but external pressure rarely destroys a healthy civilization. It exposes one that is already fragile. At their peak, empires appear strong from the outside. Their borders are vast, their armies disciplined, their wealth impressive. Yet maintaining this appearance requires enormous effort. Frontiers must be defended, garrisons supplied, roads maintained, diplomacy managed. As internal systems strain, external pressure becomes harder to absorb. Rome did not fall simply because it was invaded. It had repelled invasions for centuries. What changed was its ability to respond. Economic strain weakened recruitment, political instability disrupted command. Bureaucratic expansion slowed decision-making, inequality reduced loyalty to the state. When external threats increased, Rome relied more heavily on mercenaries and federated allies, trading long-term cohesion for short-term security. This solution worked, until it didn't. The presence of external pressure accelerated internal breakdown. The same pattern appears across history. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE involved invasions, migrations, and warfare. But those forces struck civilizations already weakened by trade disruption, climate stress, and overextended systems. The interconnected world that had once provided prosperity became a liability. For the Maya, conflict between city-states intensified as resources dwindled. Warfare did not cause collapse alone. It magnified existing stress. External pressure acts like gravity. It pulls on the weakest points. Healthy systems bend. Fragile systems fracture. At the peak of civilization, borders are longest, enemies most numerous, and responsibilities greatest. Expansion increases exposure. This creates a strategic dilemma. Retreat threatens prestige. Expansion increases strain. Stagnation invites challenge. Most civilizations choose to defend everything, and in doing so, they exhaust themselves. As internal cohesion weakens, responses to external threats become reactive rather than strategic. Short-term survival replaces long-term planning. Resources are diverted from maintenance to defense. Civil infrastructure decays. Public trust erodes further. Eventually, the system can no longer distinguish between internal and external problems. Everything becomes a crisis. At this stage, collapse often appears sudden, triggered by a military defeat, a sacked city, or a lost battle. But the defeat is not the cause, it is the confirmation. External pressure does not end civilizations. It reveals that they have already lost the capacity to adapt. And at the peak, when empires appear most formidable, that capacity is often already gone. When we look across history, a pattern emerges that is both unsettling and consistent. Civilizations do not collapse because they fail early. They collapse because they succeed too well. At their peak, societies are most complex, most interconnected, and most confident in the systems they have built. Their cities are full, their institutions refined, their authority seemingly unquestionable. To those living inside them, collapse feels unthinkable, and that is precisely why it happens. Peak civilizations are optimized for continuation, not transformation. Every system is designed to preserve what already exists. The current distribution of power, resources, and belief. Change is treated as a threat rather than a necessity. Success narrows vision. Complexity locks societies into rigid structures. Inequality erodes legitimacy. Environmental stress exposes hidden dependencies. External pressure reveals internal weakness. None of these forces alone causes collapse. Together, they overwhelm adaptability. Collapse is not a single event. It is a loss of flexibility. When systems can no longer respond creatively to stress, they default to control, coercion, and preservation of hierarchy. These responses buy time, but they drain resilience. By the time collapse becomes visible, it is already advanced. The roads still exist. The laws are still enforced. The rituals continue. The symbols of power remain. But belief is gone. Participation weakens. Maintenance falters. Coordination breaks down. What remains is structure without cohesion. History shows us that collapse is not the opposite of civilization. It is a phase within it. Civilizations rise by solving problems. They peak by institutionalizing those solutions. They collapse when the solutions themselves become the problem. This is not a moral judgment on the past. It is a structural reality. The people who lived through these collapses were not blind. They adapted as best they could within the limits of the systems they inherited. Their failure was not a lack of intelligence, but a lack of room to maneuver. Understanding this pattern does more than explain ancient history. It forces us to rethink how societies endure. Resilience does not come from size, wealth, or complexity alone. It comes from adaptability, from distributed power, from systems that can contract as well as expand, from legitimacy that renews itself rather than demands obedience. The lesson of peak collapse is not that civilizations are doomed. It is that success carries responsibility. The greater the system, the greater the cost of rigidity. And the most dangerous moment in any civilization's history is not when it is struggling, but when it believes it has solved the problem of survival. Because history does not reward permanence. It rewards those who remain capable of change.